Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter 11, Part 1C on the maturation and activation of T lymphocytes. I know last video was a bit much. This video will be easier once you get the concepts from last video. It is some parts similar and some parts additional information. So maturation of T lymphocytes. Now lymphocytes are all made in the bone marrow before birth, but T lymphocytes differ from B lymphocytes in the fact that it matures in the thymus gland. Now this thymus can shrink after puberty, and this is why our immune system sort of goes downhill after we age, after puberty. Now T cell also has receptors on its cell surface membrane. It is complementary with a specific antigen. One T cell, one type of receptor, one type of antigen. Now it's very similar in structure to antibodies, but it is not quite called the antibody receptor. So please be careful. T cell receptors are called T cell receptors, not antibody receptors. Now after maturation, only then it can circulate in the blood and lymph. Now after maturation, what happens? So if the specific pathogens invade, what happens next is an antigen presentation cell formation first. The macrophage will engulf the pathogen and presents the antigens on the cell surface. Then only the specific T lymphocytes which have receptors that is complementary to the antigen will be activated. So that particular type of T cell will be selected and activated. So this is called clonal selection. Right after that, it will divide by mitosis, and this is called clonal expansion. So the same type, okay, there are many types of T lymphocytes here. Only this type is complementary to the antigen presenting cell antigen here. And you can see that it divides to many T cells of the same type. Only after that it can develop into two types of cell, different here, T helper cell or T killer cell. Let's look at what T helper cells do first. Yeah. So T helper cells, they majorly function. The main function is to secrete cytokines. Cytokines are actually small hormone-like molecules, but we don't call it hormones, we call it cytokines. Another name for it is interleukins. And they do generally three things. They stimulate B cells, they stimulate macrophages, and stimulate killer T cells. T killer cells, killer T cells, same thing, okay? Now, so three things again: B cells, macrophages, and killer T cells. What does it stimulate it to do? It stimulates it to become more vigorous. So B cells that are stimulated will divide and develop into plasma cells and memory B cells, and this will result in increased antibodies level. So it sort of ramps up. It's like a booster. Okay. Stimulate macrophages. This would stimulate macrophages to carry out phagocytosis more vigorously. So it does it faster, does it more. And killer T cells which are stimulated would divide and produce more toxins as well. Okay, so the second function here of T helper cells though is to form T helper memory cells. And this is also in charge of secondary response and long-term immunity. You don't need to know any more detail of T helper memory cells. Let's talk about cytotoxic T killer cell. Now, as we said just now, it produces toxins, and that's why it's called cytotoxic, toxic to cells. So this is what it does. Number one, it seeks out infected host cells. This includes the antigen presenting cells. This also includes cancer cells. Now, these faulty infected host cells, seek them out and it will destroy them. So how does it do that? Number one, it sort of attaches to the surface of cells first. They do have some sort of receptor to detect whether it's foreign or not. Then it punches holes into cells and then secrete toxins into cells. It's sort of like throwing a grenade. So what does it secrete into the cells? It secretes hydrogen peroxide sometimes, or sometimes perforin, which is another sort of chemical, in order to kill the cell. Now, what are the functions other than that? It forms killer T memory cells. So as we see here, helper cells, T helper memory cells, T killer cells, T killer memory cells. Again, it is involved in long-term immunity and involved in enabling the secondary response of the body. Here's a summary of the immune response. This is what they expect you to write when they ask for a description of the immune response. The first step is always when the phagocyte engulfs the antigen, and this, after engulfment, this produces the antigen presenting cell, APC. Now the APC presents the antigen to lymphocytes, activating the humoral or antibody-mediated immune response or the cell-mediated immune response. Now the humoral or antibody-mediated immune response is largely concerning B cells, okay? And B cells here get activated and develop into plasma cells, which produces antibodies, and memory B cell, which is in charge of long-term immunity. Let's look at the cell-mediated immune response. The T cells, they're activated, okay, will produce T killer cells, and these T killer cells will secrete toxins into infected host cells and kill it, or T helper cells, which secrete cytokines. Now, T helper cells will develop T helper memory cells, whereas T killer cells will also develop into T killer memory cells. So there are 3 types of memory cells here. And each type of cell does different things. Now, these cell-mediated immune response and humoral immune response, they do not they are not independent from each other. They do communicate and work together. So here are some green arrows to show you how they work together. Let's talk about antibodies first. Antibodies, in many mechanisms, they actually bind to the antigen and present it to the phagocyte in order for phagocytes to engulf more. B cells, which are activated by the APC here, can also become an APC. Cytokines that are secreted by T helper cell can stimulate the phagocyte to undergo phagocytosis more vigorously. It can stimulate the T killer cells to produce more toxins, and it can stimulate the B cell in order to develop into more plasma cells to produce even more antibodies. So you can see here there is a lot of cross-talking. There's not a lot of communication. There's a lot of working together in different processes to result in immune response and to protect your body against different pathogens.